Okay, Professor.
Hello,
Hello.
you are Ahmad.
Okay.
Can you see and hear me well?
Yeah, exactly.
You can see me okay and hear me okay?
Yeah,
Good, good. Okay.
I can hear your voice and saw you clearly. So, how we begin this discussion? Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready. It's really up to you. What I did was I just put down some notes in a PowerPoint for those who are, let's say, generally interested in understanding Marx's thinking.
Okay, so you have the PowerPoint to share by yourself?
Yeah, I sent it to Reza, but I have it on my computer and I usually share that through the Zoom.
Okay. Okay, we have any participant join this room, so maybe we can start this discussion.
Right.
Okay. Good evening. Yeah. Times Jakarta, Professor Howard Nicholas. And hello, ladies and gentlemen, all of the participants in this discussion. I am Ahmad Arif Widianto. It is my pleasure and honor to be a moderator for this session on the topic Marxism, supply chain, and dependency. I will be hosting this event for around 1 hour and a half. This forum organized by the Development Study Club and supported by the Department of Sociology, State University of Malang. Also, the Kempalan as a media partner. Okay, first of all, may I briefly introduce to you, for our participant, our speaker here, Professor Dr. Howard Nicholas, a senior lecturer in economics, International Institute of Social Studies of the Erasmus University of Rotterdam, and he voted 20 times the best teacher in Rotterdam. His areas of interest are neoclassical economics, capacity building for economics, related policy, and business decision making. He has a wide range of experience and exposure in teaching around the world, mainly on financial economics. His in-depth knowledge and understanding of global macroeconomic environment and its impact on the world economy has led to contribute toward the development of the economy. Some of his last decade publications are Marx's Theory of Price and its modern rivals in 2011, and what is the problem with neoclassical price theory in 2013, and wider Srafra's theory of price in 2014, problems with post-Keynesian price theory or Marxist perspective in 2014, etc. It is need more long time to read his excellent number of publications. It's exactly productive, Mr. Professor. And before this discussion begin, please to all participants, make sure your speaker unmute during presentation from Professor. The participants will be given the opportunity to ask questions after the presentation. Okay, please give me a warm welcome to Professor Howard. Hello, Professor.
Hello, Ahmad. Hello, everyone.
Okay.
I wave. It's one of these, the world that we're living in, we have to wave by Zoom.
Okay, hello. It is indeed a pleasure here. Professor will deliver interesting topic about introduction to Marx economics. This topic will provide important insight for us, especially in seeing the reality of global development and the current economy, and how relevant is it in analyzing the current condition of Indonesia economics. Okay, Professor Howard, time is yours.
Thank you, Ahmed. Well, hello everyone. I was communicating over the last couple of months with, I think, Reza Hikam. Is that correct? Reza, I've been communicating with you.
Yes, sir.
And the main thing that I wanted to mention to everyone is that this is not explicitly on development, but we can discuss that as we're going along. Rather, it is especially for those who have not had an introduction to Marxism, a bit of an introduction to what Marx actually said. And then at a later stage, if you're interested, I will explain a little bit about the book I'm literally about to submit to Macmillan's now, which is actually the result of 40 years of my research, the theory of money. So it's really something that I've spent a tremendous amount of my time and energies and so on. And it's quite interesting because over all these years, when I've been teaching at the ISS, I've also been teaching in business schools all over the world. And when I teach in business schools, I don't tell anyone that actually I'm teaching them Marxism. They somehow get a bit frightened if you say you're teaching Marxism. They think you're teaching something about revolution, you know. And so I don't really say anything. The odd thing is that it's incredibly well received. So when people listen to my lectures, they are so enthusiastic that they basically want more and more. And so in recent times, what I've done is I've started giving lectures to the business community in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka is the country of my origin. I don't look very Sri Lankan, I'm sorry to say, but it's the country of my origin. I'm from European descent. Okay, so my ancestors went there 300 years ago. But I feel Sri Lankan. So I give all these lectures in Sri Lanka, and the ones who subscribe to the lectures are all from the business community. Because for most of the business people, what I teach is the real world. And what they get at university is actually a waste of time for them. You know, so most of the people that I'm teaching actually, by and large, ignored economics completely when they were at university and even after they left. And usually these people are very high level in their organizations. So I do what is also called an elite course, which is mostly for CEOs of companies and CFOs. So when I tell people that actually I'm teaching Marxism, but nobody knows that I'm teaching Marxism, they're very, very surprised. They can't actually believe, because this is the only time in their lives they've actually understood any economics. And now I'm telling them that actually this is Marx's economics. So this has been the thing that I've tried to do all my teaching career, is to translate Marx into modern day language, which is actually useful for everyone. So often I give guest lectures. Let's say, a month and a half ago, I gave a guest lecture in the morning at the Communist Party headquarters in Colombo to all the left leaders and the leaders of trade unions. So that was a 2.5-hour session because of the current crisis in Sri Lanka. And then in the afternoon, I gave a lecture to the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, to all the business people. The same lecture, not any different. I don't change anything that I say. And so everyone gets really confused as to what exactly I'm teaching and what exactly my thinking is. Well, I tell people the problem is that we have stopped studying in the modern generation. We don't read and think anymore. We use, this Twitter and all sorts of other social media where it stops you thinking. And you can see that reflected in all the studies that come out. They don't really think about what's happening in the real world and how to relate that to what people said, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, especially Marx. Instead, we just repeat what he said in his books. And that's not easy for ordinary people to understand, because we use strange words, we use strange formulations, and they don't see any relevance. It's not that they're against radical ideas, it's just simply they don't understand what you're saying to them. And basically, they ignore Marxism. So what I've tried to do is to translate what Marx had to say into ordinary language and make it very useful. So, currently, as I'm talking to you, last week, I gave 4 lectures to 2 different business groups. So one day I had off. Next week, I give 5 lectures. Every day, I'm teaching a business group. And the fact is, they pay a lot of money to hear me. So that should come as a huge surprise to all of you. That business people are there paying a lot of money to hear this lecture because it's the only time they hear some economics that is useful for them for making money. Because as I've always told people, Marx is about the real world. And once you translate it into the real world, actually it's incredibly useful. But nowhere, as academics, the thing that we do most of the time is we try and write as many papers as we can and get published, so that you can become a professor. We don't worry about the content very much. All we do is publish. And actually, as a result, we have lost connection with the real world. We have lost connection with ordinary people. So this is my own background. And I don't publish that much, even though you generously introduced me as publishing several pieces, I actually don't publish much at all. Instead, I research to understand and to teach. And also to invest. So I have to tell you the truth. I invest my own money. And I invest on the basis of my understanding of Marx. Okay, so it's not only that I teach and I research to teach, I research to invest as well. Okay, so I don't want to hide anything from anyone. That's also why business people trust me a lot, because they know that I know the markets extremely well. All right. Right. I now will use my slides. Let me see, which slide have I got? Let me share this one. Okay. What I'm going to do is introduce Marx's thinking in general terms, and maybe say one or two things about the book that I'm just going to publish, which I hope does a lot of damage to all the textbooks that are used all over the world. You know, I hope people throw the textbooks into the bin after my book comes out. I'm only joking. Never throw books into bins. Always learn something from books. Okay, so this is quite an interesting photograph somebody sent to me, a friend of mine who was visiting the grave of Marx in London, Highgate Cemetery. And he said, Howard, you won't believe it, but they've damaged the stone on his grave. Some vandals and hooligans have damaged the stone. And what I said to my friend was, you know, you can damage the grave, you can destroy the stone, but you can't destroy Marx's ideas. You know, after all these years, his ideas are still incredibly strong. And in my view, they will come back again and dominate all of academic economics, in my view. You know? So when Engels, his good friend, made this prediction that his name will endure through the ages, I actually take this part, not so much his name, but his work. Okay, many people have accepted that Marx is probably the most influential scholar that ever lived. And interesting, so this is one example of people recognizing that still to this day, he's the most cited scholar of all time. But an interesting thing happened some 5 or 6 years ago. The Economist magazine asked its 250,000 subscribers, I think even more, they sent a questionnaire, and they asked them in that questionnaire, who do you think the most influential person from the academic world has been in the last 200 to 300 years? So they expected Einstein, Newton, Darwin, famous scientists to be at the top. But actually the number one by far was Marx, by far. So Marx got something like 150,000 votes. And then next came Darwin. And after that, Einstein, and then Newton. But in fact, Marx got more votes than all the rest of all the scientists put together. And the interesting thing is that these people are usually business people who read the Economist magazine. They're not left-wing activists. They're business people. So it is recognized by everybody that his ideas and thinking is still so influential that it dominates all of academia in terms of the citation, the quotes, etc. You will hear his name constantly. From my perspective, the problem is he's misunderstood. And here, most radical people who I give lectures to, they don't like me saying what I'm about to say. You know, they treat Marxism as a religion. I don't. I treat Marxism as a science of the economy. It's not a religion. So they say that Marxism is the economics of socialism. This is complete and utter nonsense. You know, there's no such thing. Marx barely wrote anything about socialism. What was written on socialism was Lenin or Mao or Stalin, but Marx did not write on socialism. So to say that he actually introduced the economics of socialism means you have never read Marx. You know? Number two, they say that Marx's economics is a theory of how the workers are exploited. Also not true. Also not true. And if that is the case, you don't need Marx. There are plenty of other people who have written extensively on exploitation. Exploitation meaning how the workers are used to make profits. Okay? Marx explained that is true, but this is not his economics. His economics is far more than that. And if one thinks it's only about proving exploitation, then again, it's a misunderstanding of Marx. The third one, which is usually very young people who grab onto this one, that Marx was predicting the end of capitalism, the downfall of capitalism. In fact, he never did. Okay, so this again has been attributed to Marx, but Marx did not predict the end of capitalism. Indeed, if you look carefully at Marx and if you study Marx, you will see that according to him, capitalism is an incredibly powerful economic system that has the potential to increase living standards of everybody, of everyone. So this, of course, does not sit well with a lot of radical thinkers. They don't like us to say that. They want to believe that Marx is writing about socialism, about another world, another system. They want to believe that Marx was talking on the behalf of the oppressed. They want to believe that all we have to do is wait a little bit of time and capitalism will destroy itself. Maybe it does, but this is not Marx's prediction. Okay, so just for those of us who, those of you, sorry, who have not really read that much of Marx, what I'm doing here is giving you the most important writings of his, especially the economics writings. Okay, so these are his economics writings. I do not mention the others like the Communist Manifesto and all of those, but just his economics. Now, what is true is that even in his early days, so these writings, he said some intelligent things. But actually, these are not what defines Marx's greatness as an economist. It's these. And usually people point to Das Kapital, but I think that all of these, this is the contribution, the theories of surplus value, and Das Kapital, they're all very important, all extremely important. The problem is reading them. So usually, like when I was doing my PhD long time ago, more than 40 odd years ago, I used to tell everyone, yes, Marx said this, yes, Marx said that. Shall I tell you a secret? I didn't read any Marx up till that point. I read others who had read Marx, you understand? But I didn't, because every time I opened Capital, it was too complicated for me, too boring. I used to fall asleep, so I had to always read it early morning after 2 cups of coffee, because otherwise, if I read it any other time of day, I would fall asleep. So it is a fact that a large majority of people who say they're Marxists actually have never read any of Marx's most important works. It's not a negative statement about people. It's just that we don't have that time and, let's say, the environment to allow us to have this luxury to sit there with these huge books and read them. We just can't do that. But the fact is, even academics who are paid to do this do not do it. No, they don't really dig into this. And this is part of the problem that we have, is people writing and trying to interpret Marx who actually have not properly read Marx. So what is it that I have learned from Marx, reading Marx, is there are 3 things. One, I say he helped me understand what is the nature of this system. What is it about? When we talk of capitalism, what really is that? Number 2, it helps me understand basically the long-term tendencies of this system. Where is it going over the long term? And then the third one, and the one that most of the business people I teach, they love this one, the dynamic of capitalism. How do we understand the movement of capitalism? And I'll just say a little bit about each of those. And most attention I pay to the dynamic. Okay, so firstly, when Marx was analyzing the system, and this is where we get into these big words. So whenever I want to impress anyone, I use the word dialectical. Okay, it's a nice big word, isn't it? A lot of people use this word. I used to use it many times when I was a PhD student and even younger, to impress everyone, but actually it is not that complicated a word. What it means is when you study something, try and get some depth in understanding it. That's all it is. Okay? It's trying to get depth in understanding something and not just looking at the superficial aspects of it. That's what that dialectical method means. It's been completely misrepresented and misunderstood by people who have tried to interpret Marx, especially Engels and Stalin. Okay, these are 2 who, for whatever reason, they completely misrepresented what Marx's method of analyzing things is. He wanted to get to the heart of things. Number 2 is Marx gives us a way to understand history, and history is a system of cooperative production. So that is human history. We cooperate with each other and we produce goods. And in the process of producing, some people manage to take all the surplus that is produced in the society. In other words, the wealth. Okay, we say that most societies have been class-based. You have the rich class and everyone else. And we can analyze history through this lens. Okay, so both not only capitalism, but even pre-capitalism. And the third thing, which is really forgotten with Marx's analysis, is the third thing is he criticizes others, not because he wanted to show they were wrong, but actually it helped him to make clear his own thinking. Okay, so that is often the best way to criticize someone else, not to simply say they're wrong, but really to say, why are they wrong? And why are you right? And that is something that was very important to him in helping him to develop his thinking. And he wrote these 3 books that I referred to earlier. Sorry. These 3 books, they're theories of surplus value, which complemented the 3 volumes of Das Kapital. So we have 3 volumes of theories of surplus value, which is criticizing his contemporary classical British economists. And from that, he learned a lot to write this. So these are important things. And I apply it today because I hear people say, oh, these are neoliberals. Yes. So what? You know, does that make them wrong automatically? You know, you have to say, why are they wrong? Is there something illogical in what they're saying? Is there something contradictory? Is the evidence that they present weak? And for me, this is really important because what we have now is people say, no, I'm right because it's me, you know, and they are wrong simply because I say they're wrong. They don't give any solid arguments. And I consider this is one of the most destructive things to academia that has happened. We call those people postmodern people. Okay, nowadays, you know, everybody simply says, no, I'm right because, you know, I'm a woman. I'm right because I'm bisexual. I'm right because I'm black. I'm right because they don't engage with the real logic and evidence to support arguments. And this has destroyed academia, especially Marxism, you know, completely destroyed. It has been happening before in previous generations. I remember when I was young, anyone expressing an idea who was an academic was condemned because they were not working class or peasants. You know, they say, oh, you don't know, you're not from the working classes, you're not from the peasantry, only they know, you know. Again, no logic, no arguments, etc. Whereas actually Marx was one of the most meticulous. He had to dissect every single word that people used. And he had to first understand it and then say why they were wrong. So if anyone has ever been through theories of surplus value, you have to be impressed with the detail with which he criticizes somebody. Okay, so what I get and what I teach everybody, and this is interesting because it's the first time they actually hear this. Now, you will perhaps not believe it, but in textbooks, when we teach people, this word disappears, profits. Occasionally you will read it, you know, where we say something like maximization of profits, but actually there is no theory of profit in orthodox economics, and there's no explanation as to why these arise. But one of the absolutely fundamental things about Marx is he says the whole system has to be understood by profits in the process of producing all the things we produce. This is the key. And it's the key in two ways. One is, if we do not get profits as companies, we will not produce. We do not produce for people's satisfaction. Full stop. They have to have money to buy our goods, then we produce. And we make profits. Okay? Now, what is important is the second one of that is profits is the basis for financing our investments as companies. This is forbidden in orthodox economics. In orthodox economics, they say the finance comes from the banks. This is simply untrue. I have evidence after evidence that the financing, and we call this long-term fixed capital formation, that's what we mean by investment. So when you buy machines and set up factories, where does the money come from? Profits. If you don't make profits, you cannot expand as a company. Now, when I teach this to bankers and business people, they say, yes, you're right. You know, so what they ask me, you know, what's special about what you're teaching us? I say, well, okay, we're going to have a special session. I've got a 1,000-page textbook from Mankiw. Let's go and see what he says, where the financing comes from. And they're amazed. They're totally amazed. They say, but why do we teach this rubbish in the universities? You know, why doesn't someone stop this nonsense being taught? You see, so this is why when I teach this and I just give them simple evidence, a simple table, they always look at me strangely and they say, yes, but we know all of this, what you're talking about. We know that we produce because of profits, and we know that the financing for our long-term expansion comes from profits. And I say, okay, find me an article or a textbook anywhere. I don't care where it comes from, which actually says that. They can't find it. I've been teaching in business schools at the highest level in business schools. I teach a lot of Harvard graduates now who come back to Sri Lanka. And one Harvard graduate is telling me, he said, why did I pay $150,000 to go to Harvard when not one of my professors taught me what you're teaching me now? You know? And he asked me, where do you get this from? I said, from Marx. I think he nearly had a heart attack when I told him this. Okay, so where do these profits come from then? And this is the thing that the system does not like to hear. It comes from labor, from productivity. Okay, and this is not by making workers work harder, that's also there. But one of the most important things is that Marx discovered is that capitalism is a system that gets profits by increasing productivity of labor through technology. Through technology. And that is the secret of capitalism. is when you actually have a proper capitalist system, a proper industrial capitalist system, technology change becomes very, very fast. And this is what the East Asian, successful East Asian countries, sorry, I don't think Indonesia is any longer in that category of successful East Asian countries, but maybe you will become that again, maybe. But the successful East Asian countries have all discovered that to get more and more profits, you need rapid technological change. You need to get faster and better machines in. So the most recent examples we see, very successful, China, of course, but also countries like Vietnam. Okay, and you can see the technology change now taking place in Vietnam is absolutely staggeringly fast. Now, one of the courses that I give is, I'm going to say, one of the courses that I give, so just to come back to this, and the battles that I've been fighting, just to make this point, is that we have a global economic system that actually deliberately blocks developing countries from going down the industrialization path. It's deliberate, it's calculated, and I give this a whole series of lectures to developing country people about this. In fact, I will even go so far as to tell you that nowadays, so you can actually, go to YouTube. Any of you have been on YouTube and type my name in? Have you done that? There is a video about me talking on the Sub-Saharan Africa. Why is Sub-Saharan Africa so poor? Answer is, deliberately, the Western countries have blocked their industrialization. Because once you have industrialization, what happens is this incredible drive for productivity increases of labor leads to rapid technology change. And that starts to make you competitive with Western countries. So they block it, except for countries that are actually strategic for the West. Now, since Indonesia was not strategic to the West, then in the 1990s with the East Asian crisis, they deindustrialized Indonesia. Deliberate. It's of course very deliberate, very calculated. And the reason is you're too dangerous for the West. You have a young population. You have the experience of industrialization. And if we allow a population of 250 plus million people to get into industrialization, you will damage the Western countries. So we deliberately block industrialization in Indonesia like we do it in Sub-Saharan Africa. You see, the thing about China is they have learned this. When they restudied Marx, they understood how important a profits-based system is. People think China is communist. Think again. China is the most capitalist country you will ever see in your life. I have never seen a more capitalist country than China. I've been teaching in China since 2000, so I have 22 years of experience teaching in China. And what Chinese have discovered is the capitalist system can actually unleash this incredible increase in productivity and technology change. You see, now the advanced countries see China as their main enemy. But actually, if Indonesia kept industrializing from the 1990s onwards, you would have been their main enemy now. And your standard of living would have been double what it is now, you know. But it was deliberately blocked. Of course it was, you know. And you have a great difficulty in the future. Okay, so this comes actually from studying Marx and understanding the drivers in capitalism. Now, I can tell you about the long-term tendencies. The one thing that I will mention again is this tendency of capitalism to promote technology change. And the reason for that is capitalism is based on wage labor. We pay wages to people. See, and I agree the wage before the production process starts. So once I agree the wage, my main thing is to get you to produce as many goods as you can possibly produce. Now, I can make you work for 24 hours a day, but you'll be dead after 1 week. So the next best thing for me to do is to get you lots of advanced machines to help you to produce more and more goods in the same amount of time. And that is capitalism. That is why capitalism always develops technology so fast once we unleash it. Okay. The other thing is Marx is known for saying, supposedly, that the working classes will become more and more miserable. But actually, again, people do not read properly what he wrote. What he wrote is that the fruits of all our labor, the fruits of all the prosperity goes mostly for the rich. It doesn't mean to say that the working classes' living standards don't rise. They do. They do. They also have better standards of living, but they do not get anywhere near as much as the rich do. We know this, but see, they deliberately misinterpret Marx like this. It's not that I defend Marx on everything, I don't. But it's just, you know, silly lack of reading of him doesn't help us. Because then we say, oh, you know, the working classes are going to get poorer and poorer, and that's going to lead to revolution and so on. That's not true. You know, I remember a lot of my friends saying that the East Asian countries like Singapore were going to get poorer and poorer. Really? Has anyone seen Singapore? You know, same. You know, when Vietnam started to industrialize from 2012, a lot of my friends in the UK and in Europe said, oh, you see, Vietnam is now committing economic suicide. Well, just go to Vietnam now and see the prosperity. It's absolutely staggering to see. See, again, they've unleashed this rapid technology process. So, as I said to people, the game is we have to block developing countries from industrializing. And that's where the academics come in. They teach you all these silly theories like doctrine of comparative advantage, where you should produce according to your natural comparative advantage, etc. You know, they're an absolute, utter fraud. You know, the only thing developing countries should do is get into industrialization. I mean, Indonesia, with your resources, your young people, the day I see Indonesia going down the industrialization path, I will take all the money I currently have in Vietnam out of Vietnam and put it into Indonesia. Because I think you will double your per capita income in 10 years. This is what I think. But the West doesn't want to hear this, especially not now. They don't want to hear this. And they will fight to make sure they put people in your government who are going to block industrialization. This is what they have to do. They have no choice. It's the same with Sub-Saharan Africa. So let me tell you about this video, just as an anecdote. So I did this video about, I didn't know I was doing a video. I did a presentation in ISS in 2016 to African students, because I had a lot of African students in that 1 year, and they told me, look, we don't want only what you are saying to us. We want everybody to hear what you're saying. We want especially all African students to hear what you're saying. My message is, deliberately, they have blocked industrialization in every African country. And they're reversing it in South Africa as well as I speak. And that is what has caused the poverty in Sub-Saharan Africa. So we went through all the details, how the US has more than 800 military bases in Sub-Saharan Africa. 800 military bases for what? What are they doing there? Of course, anytime any government comes into power that does not produce raw materials, they make sure the government is overthrown. That's what they're doing there. The French do the same. The British do the same. So I gave this lecture. It was half an hour. And some of you may have been to ISS, but the aula accommodated 50 more people than it should. There were 250 African students from all over the Netherlands in the aula. And one of them had a handheld camera, you know, those old camcorders, and he took the video. And then 2 years ago, he put it on social media in Ghana. And in Ghana, it had 2 million hits, 2 million hits in Ghana. Then it was picked up in Nigeria, 3 million hits. And like this, it has gone all over Sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm famous there. So if you want my autograph, guys, I'll give it to you. You know, so there are, and it's a very simple message, which everybody knows. And that is, there's only one way to prosperity, and that is industrialization. Everyone knows this. It's not a big secret. But the aim of the West is to put their own people in your governments to block that. The aim of the West is to take you to the Western countries to teach you an economics that doesn't actually help you very much. They will not teach you what I've just told you, even the little bit about profits and technology change, and the fact that this all requires you to get into manufacturing. They will not teach you that. And if I'm pro-West, I would say they shouldn't teach you that, because then it's the end of the living standards of Western people. Okay, then I'm going to get on to this. So this is the part that attracts most of my business students. Everyone who wants to make money, but actually they don't realize that what I've just told you helps you make more money than even this does. Because what I tell everyone is, in an unemotional way, the only time I will invest in any developing country is the day I see them going down the industrialization path. Otherwise, I'm not interested. You can come and tell me you are producing oil palm and all the rest of it, and you have good companies, and I don't care. I know you will never really be a prosperous country. But as soon as someone tells me, oh, we're into industrialization in a big way, and then I'm convinced, then I invest. And that's what I did with Vietnam. You know, my Sri Lankan colleagues tell me, why don't you invest in Sri Lanka? Why should I? You know, what is Sri Lanka doing that will make it's so attractive to me. Okay, this is the other part that is very attractive to most of the business people I teach, and that is that capitalism is a cycle-based system, business cycles. And it's driven by profits. Profits causes us to produce more and more and more until the rate of profit cannot rise anymore because there are too many producers and not enough buyers of all the things that we're producing. Then we have a collapse in the economic system. And then the weak companies get destroyed and the strong ones take over. We call this the business cycle. This is what it looks like. Again, we don't teach you this at university because we want to tell you that the system is really stable. And occasionally there are some shocks like the Ukraine war or, war in the Middle East or something like that, but it's not true. This is the way the system has always worked, cycles. And if you look at any of the richest investment banks in the world, the richest countries in the world, their central banks, they all have research teams working on business cycles. Because the truth is, they know what Marx said is correct, that all systems are fundamentally cycle-driven in capitalism because of the profits. It keeps driving more and more production until the system breaks down, and then the system regenerates again, always does. It never collapses permanently. Now, this becomes really important for investors. But the trick is to find out what cycles are important. And for me, there are two cycles. Now, this is something that Marx did not study. So he did not study what is called the long wave. And then what he did study was this one, the shorter cycle, which is 7 to 11 years, very well documented. Okay, so we say that from this bottom to this bottom is roughly 7 to 11 years. That's roughly what it is. But there is another cycle which is much, much longer. It's called the K wave. Now, again, what is fascinating is how much money is spent by the rich investors to study all of these things, And they're really happy that you're never taught this in university. They love all of this, but I have come across so many of them that actually they have huge teams working on this. It's not just 1 or 2 people, but they have huge numbers of teams. And this is the history of long cycles. And why it's very important is it tells us where is the system going. See, we know that it goes up and then it comes down. And here in the long cycle at the bottom, we have some really, really frightening things happening. Okay, usually what happens at the bottom of long cycles is a lot of conflict, because the long cycle is driven by new technologies, clusters of new technologies. See, so we can go back. The original one is canals, and the most recent new technology base that we're now seeing coming into place is internet, robotics, high-speed trains, satellite communication, all of these things. This is the new technology base. And whenever a new technology base comes, there's a huge disruption to the system. And this is the moment when a new power can emerge. And that new power that's emerging is China. So I have a very long lecture on this to give you all the evidence and so on. but that's not for this time. Maybe another time in the future we can do more. But why this helps me, so do I have any of my old students amongst you? Is there anyone of my old students? No? So a lot of my old students ask me, they're writing to me, they studied with me, let's say in the 1980s, 90s, 2000s. And they said, how did you know this was going to happen now? How did you know that? Because I have been telling them this is what is going to happen. The only frightening thing I said is I hope there is not a world war, because there's nearly always a world war at the bottom of long cycles, always. That is because the old powers, they try and keep their power. Now we know the US is losing its power very, very fast. And the US is now becoming mostly a raw material producer, oil and gas. This is its main export now. Whereas China now produces and exports the world's manufactures. China is now in the driving seat of the world economy. Whether anyone likes it or not, that is the fact. And if I take most of East Asia as one block, this is the center of the world at the moment. Whether anyone likes it or not, East Asia is the power of the world today. And this creates a lot of problems for the advanced countries who used to be in the driving seat. So now they're no longer there. They're likely to fight more and more wars. They've already been fighting lots of wars, from the 2 Gulf Wars to Libya to everywhere, Afghanistan. And now they're fighting a proxy war in Ukraine and could turn into a world war. It's possible. But this is because it's a dying power, and they have to try and cling on, like Britain did before. So Britain ended up fighting 2 world wars, trying to cling on to its power. Then the shorter cycles, this is how we study them. Now, I know that the cycle very, very rarely and almost never lasts more than 11 years. So in 2020, actually 2019, I was already looking at the cycle ending. And it was very clear. We gave a lot of information and data. And usually when I discover these things, I go to Sri Lanka. So I went to Sri Lanka here, I went to Sri Lanka there, and I went to Sri Lanka there, always a year in advance. So in Sri Lanka, I was in 2008, in 2000, and I always tell everyone, okay, now you have to prepare for a major recession. And I give them maybe 50 to 100 PowerPoint slides to prove my case. Only very few people listen to what I say. Somebody asked me, is China capitalist now? They've been capitalist for quite a long time. Actually, China is the most aggressive capitalist country on the planet. There's no other capitalist country as aggressive as China. And I don't mean that militarily, I mean that profit is the god to all Chinese business groups. If anyone has ever dealt with Chinese business groups, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. I teach Chinese students. I teach all high-level MBA students. They're absolutely driven by a quest for profits, like no other society that I know. If you look at a country like the Netherlands, I would actually say the Netherlands is a socialist country by comparison with China. China is really the classic capitalist country of Marx's economics. Because what the Chinese do all the time is if they see a sector dominated by one company, they introduce other companies into the sector to force competition and drive technology change. That's what they do. For example, when Huawei was dominating smartphones, the Chinese actually aggressively promoted Xiaomi and Oppo and a couple of other smartphone manufacturers deliberately. Today, who dominates the smartphones? Actually, you say Apple, but Apple has not invented anything. In a long, long time, the smartphones are fundamentally being developed by the Chinese. Of course, they're blocked in Europe and maybe other countries, but you can see that they're now dominating almost everywhere else. It's not Huawei anymore, but it's Xiaomi and Oppo and a few other Chinese brands that are doing that. Now, which is the dominant laptop in the world now? Lenovo, But the Chinese are now promoting other laptop companies. And at least one of my sons was telling me about how they have swamped Vietnamese markets with a whole array of new and fancier laptops. Okay, so this is what's happening. Vietnam, we see the same process happening. Now, when I went to Sri Lanka and I told them about these recessions, here, people don't believe me. Here, they don't believe me because they watch CNN, you see, they watch American economists. They think American economists know what they're talking about. These guys know absolutely nothing of what they're talking about. They've all been taught at Harvard and Yale and rubbish universities like that, So what is in their heads? They don't know any more than you and me. Okay, so let's say the long cycle is like this, and we come down like this. And you can see the shorter cycles move around that long cycle. So this is where we are. We're at the bottom of a long cycle. Most importantly, you should know that with the whole new technology that comes in here, the profits at the bottom of the long cycle are massive, especially in the new sectors, new industries. They're massive. And that's why global profits are highest that they've been in the last 50 years, much higher than here. Here, the profits are very low, and that's why the stock markets do. Somebody asked me about Huawei being killed by the US embargo. Yes, they killed Huawei's phones, but who dominates the 5G network production now in the world? Huawei. You see, they go from one to the other, and they don't want to fight the smartphone war because they actually can't beat Oppo and Xiaomi. Those companies are much too powerful for Huawei. So they went into something that they now have a monopoly. They have a global monopoly. So the US has to import Huawei 3G and 4G network systems. They don't tell you about that, but Huawei dominates. UK the same, Europe the same. Huawei dominates those. Huawei's profits growth was the highest it has been in a decade last year. But they're very quiet. They don't want to attract attention, you see, because they know the Americans want to destroy them. But let me ask you this. Who sold the most electric vehicles in the world last year? You will immediately tell me Tesla. In fact, it's not true. It's a Chinese company. It's a Chinese company. I forget the name of it. And that Chinese company is now starting to move all over Asia. Actually, the funniest thing of all is that that Chinese company has just come out with a luxury car. My son knows it because he invested money in the company. That Chinese company, for the first time ever, has beaten Mercedes and Audi. Not Wuling, it's another one. It's got three initials. Dubs. I'm asking one of my other sons, but it's beautiful cars they're now producing, and they've moved heavily into India as well, etc. But okay, so we're here now. I just want to show you. I mean, this is what excites everybody. What happens in this long down is inflation keeps falling. Inflation keeps falling non-stop. If inflation falls, what also happens is interest rates fall. You see? So now this is interesting, isn't it? Because we are told by all these economists, no, inflation is caused by printing money. And it's because we've controlled printing money that we have no inflation anymore. Really? Really? Has the Federal Reserve, if you look at the Federal Reserve from 2009 to 2021, you've never seen more printing money in the history of the Federal Reserve than in that period. Where was the inflation? No inflation. The ECB, printing, non-stop. Japan printed so much money that currently the cash base of the Japanese system is 120% of its GDP. Historic average is 10%. Cash base today is 120% of GDP. You know, because we're in the down. Technology changes are so massive, they cause prices to fall. When prices fall, interest rates fall. Now, this is the only time I give you an investment tip. Okay, I won't give you another investment tip. This is the only one. You have to now listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you because it's worth gold dust. Okay, Reza, are you paying me for this lecture? I don't think so. Ahmad, are you paying me for this lecture? No, I don't think so. Okay, let me give you this investment tip. You see, when we are on this long down and interest rates are falling, there is only one investment you should make, and that is in bonds. Because as interest rates fall, the price of bonds keeps rising. Very safe, very safe. It also means that, and this I tell to young people, if you have to buy a house, buy it now. Borrow for 30 years, fix your interest rates, because somewhere here, interest rates will be about 15%. So when you want to buy a house, it's going to be very, very expensive in the future. So this is your last chance. Once we go into this bad recession we're about to go into, you young people, this is the moment. Okay, that's if you can borrow and fix the interest rate. Can you see why all these capitalist people are so interested in my courses? You see, they don't realize it's all coming from Marx. Okay, here is the profit rate. Do you remember I told you the profit rate? So these are the profit rates. You can see how it moves with the cycle. It's lowest at the top of the cycle. Here, see, 1980s. Here, 1980s were low. And it's highest once we get to the bottom of the long cycle. Yeah. It's highest in this period. That's why stock markets are so strong, also because interest rates are so low. Okay, so I end with this. I think this is the last I have. No, I have one more. So don't expect a collapse of capitalism. I urge people who are in radical movements, in trade unions, etc., don't see capitalism only negatively in Indonesia, in my view. I think that is what the West wants you to say. They do not want basically a strong capitalist development process in which social institutions are strong. So I think trade unions have to be strong, social organizations have to be strong, so that the wealth is redistributed a bit better. For example, like Taiwan. Taiwan did it deliberately to avoid people, let's say, working more with China. So that's why they made sure that a lot of the wealth was redistributed to ordinary people. But Taiwanese people are actually very wealthy now. Ordinary people are very wealthy. So I think there is still, a path for capitalism in Indonesia. I know people don't like me saying that. In Sri Lanka, when I say this, I can hear the trade union people gasping for air, and think, what is this guy saying? We want communism, and so on. And then I don't think that we have, just to sit around and wait for socialism and communism. I'm not even sure what people mean by this anymore. But what I do feel is that we have to build strong social institutions that help the weaker people in our societies, the workers, etc. And we have to guard against what is happening in the US, which is monopoly capitalism. In the US, 5 companies account for 25% of all the profits earned in the 3 major stock markets in the US. 5 companies, you know what they are: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, I forget the other 2 now, but these 5 dominate. Now, in previous generations, the top 5 only accounted for 10%. So we're now seeing a land of monopoly capitalism, which is also normal when a country is dying. When an empire is dying, then you get cannibalization by the big companies. Now, I do have quite a few criticisms of the orthodox economics, and it really, you need to do a little bit, I need to have a bit more depth, but let me just say a couple of things. Okay, the first and most important thing, we teach everyone that printing money is bad. You remember that if you go to any university in the world, they always tell you printing money is bad. It causes inflation. Now, the advanced countries printed money for the last 15 years non-stop. And not small amounts, vast, vast amounts, beyond anyone's wildest dreams. And all that time, inflation kept falling. So we know that the theory has been completely butchered. We know there's not even a shred of evidence left in it. But you see, what happens is when you go to the universities, they teach you lots of mathematics and econometrics, statistics. And they pretend that that is scientific. They try and make sure that your brain is frazzled, that you are not thinking. That is what they make sure. And they're successful because if you do not write the exam papers using lots of maths and econometrics, you will not pass. And if you don't pass, you don't get a good job when you return to Indonesia. Or even in Indonesia, this is what they do. And they don't worry whether it makes sense in the real world or not. This is where the business people come in. You see, the business people, they don't get any qualification with my courses. They don't even get a piece of paper saying that they attended my courses. All they get is a receipt for the money they have paid to me to attend my courses. And the reason they come to my courses is because they know if they want to really understand some economics, they're never going to get it at any university in the world. As I told you, I have been teaching recently Harvard graduates. because they were so frustrated with what they learned in the United States at Harvard. Okay, so this is one very clear example. Number two, we used to tell everyone if the government runs a budget deficit, it is very, very bad and causes a crisis of the economy. Now, we can see what the advanced countries did in 2008 and 9 and 2021 is ran the biggest budget deficits in their history. But when the IMF comes to Sri Lanka, it tells us, oh, your problem is you ran a big budget deficit. Now, actually, they're right. But the question I always ask everyone is, why is it wrong for us, but right for the United States and Europe to run budget deficits? What's the difference between us? You never explain that. And of course, there's a lot of confusion there. Okay, so that's the second thing that I always tell. The third thing I tell is we teach everyone this doctrine of comparative advantage, meaning that all countries should produce according to their natural endowments. So Indonesia is somehow naturally endowed with raw materials and palm oil. And therefore, that's what you should produce. And if you do that, you will one day be rich, just like the advanced countries. And they tell the same story to the African countries. We know it's a lie. We know it's nonsense. We know it's absolute rubbish. Okay, we know that we actually should go down the manufacturing path. But what this all means is actually economics is ideology. What they teach is ideology. There is no science in it, but they try and pretend with all this maths and stats and so on. And any of you who have done economics courses will know that you really feel good that you can work out some derivatives or do some econometric model and so on. It makes you feel good. But actually, you don't know what the hell you are talking about. You know, you're just there, ready to be used by anybody to say anything they want you to say. And the most important thing is you can never use this to make money for yourselves ever, you know, with anything that you learn at university. This is the standard thing. Okay, guys, I leave it there. And you can ask me some questions, any questions you want to ask me. I saw some questions were there on the chat. Shall I answer a couple of those? Yeah, so there are some someone has asked whether the orthodox economics I refer to is only the neoclassical economics. Does it also include the Keynesian economics started under the Suharto era? Well, actually, it's, for me, a bit like the democratic systems that we have in most countries in the world, but especially in the West. We say there is democracy, and you can choose between this party and that party, but actually they're the same. They're the same. They're not any different from each other. And it's the same with the neoclassicals and the Keynesians. They are actually needed at different times in the long business cycle. So, for example, today, we need the Keynesians because the Keynesians justify the printing of money and the budget deficits that the advanced countries need for the system to keep going. But in 20 to 30 years' time, I guarantee you the neoclassicals will be back, because what we will need in the economic system is controlling the budget deficits and controlling the amount of money we print. Okay, so there are actually two groups that are essentially both ideological. They do not have any scientific basis, but they're very much needed by the system. What the system doesn't want you to see is that the system moves in cycles, in these long cycles, that explains these ideologies. I remember around 2000, I gave a class to, it's a very special class for me. It was a group of very argumentative students of mine. And in that class, I told people that in about 10 to 15 years, you will see the Keynesians coming back, because at the time I was teaching, Keynesianism was a bad word, and everyone thought these guys were stupid. But today, they are now the dominant force in US academia, also European academia. Okay, they dominate the policy advice scene, etc. And the lunatics are considered the neoclassical economists. Now I make the same prediction, that in 15 years from today, the neoclassicals will be back. As the business cycle goes towards its top, they will be needed. So actually, it's the same. It's the same. And they all work from the same foundations, which is basically a foundation that is criticizing the emphasis on labor productivity. Somebody has asked about the decline of demographics. And what's the best way to fix the awful job situation in Indonesia? Well, you heard my recommendation. Is I believe if Indonesia tomorrow goes on a very aggressive export-oriented manufacturing strategy, you will not have employment problems. You only have employment problems, like most other developing countries, when that industrialization is blocked. That's when you have employment problems. We know it's actually an easy fix in principle, but the problem is you are fighting a very difficult battle. You are fighting against global forces that are trying to block that. So, for example, you have to do work with the IMF and the World Bank. Their job is to block industrialization in developing countries. They always argue with me. When I was running a think tank in Sri Lanka, when I've been involved in all these roundtables and so on, I always challenge them to give me an example of any country at any time in history that they have ever supported with industrialization. They never can. Oh, I'll get back to you on that. They always tell me, I'll get back to you on that. Yeah, you'll get back to me when? Industrialization, someone is asking me how to boost it. It's actually very straightforward. It's not that complicated in principle. Again, in principle, the starting point is you have to go aggressively for giving incentives for manufacturing sector that is export oriented, particularly the electronics and electrical equipment, but also the engineering sectors. And there you have to give concessional finance, you have to give tax breaks. You have to do many, many things that basically says to anyone in Indonesia, if you want to be rich, you better start producing for exports. And then they have to support you, the government has to support you with certain incentives that encourage industrialists to keep diversifying into new products and new areas and new markets. Actually, the roadmap is clear. You just have to seriously study all the other developing countries and now most recently study Vietnam, because they're doing it. They're doing it in a very, very well-structured way. I think, definitely people in Indonesia understand this, but, this is where you come against a bit of a brick wall. Sorry, let me finish the industrialization strategy. The second thing you have to do is make sure you have good domestic food production policies. You have to guarantee your food security, because otherwise you will be held hostage by foreign powers. And that's easy for a country like Indonesia in principle, but not always in fact, because you are caught in lots of red tape with the WTO. But still, I think you have to pay a lot of attention to the food security problem. Cheap food, plentiful food, that also helps with the poverty problem. The third one that you really have to make sure is you have to encourage science and engineering graduates. You have to basically give them as many scholarships as you can, encourage them to come back, make sure their salary scales are, very well remunerated, etc., because these are very important people in your system. Technology change, don't forget. And then the fourth thing that I mentioned is costs. Basic costs, transport costs, energy costs, water costs. These are all vital to keep under control so that all your production systems benefit from low costs. Okay, so when people have cheap and efficient transport, they don't ask for high wages and they're more efficient. When they have good water supplies, they don't get sick so easily, like with good food. And now everyone should know energy. Don't get caught into the madness of carbon neutral energy production things, okay? Because this is being forced on all developing countries. You have to have lots of windmills, you have to have, solar panels, etc., etc. You can do that to a limited extent, but for a country like Indonesia that needs massive amounts of energy to go down the industrialization path, you need nuclear. And there are plenty of governments now prepared to help you to build nuclear power stations. And I think what is happening in Europe is they're pretending that they're going down the alternate energy line, but in fact what they're doing is they're building lots of nuclear power stations. Okay, so I think don't get conned by this sort of green alternative thing. Definitely pay attention to environmental things, but be careful being suckered. Okay. And then the last thing I really insist on, you have to have a national government. In other words, you have to really make sure that your politicians aren't the puppets of foreign governments. And this is one of our greatest problems in all developing countries. Virtually every government that has come into power in the last 25 years in Sri Lanka has been controlled by one foreign government or another. Now, people tell me, they no longer tell me this in public because they're frightened about what I would say. Because unfortunately, for many people in Sri Lanka, I have inside knowledge of literally everybody and who is linked to whom. And on occasion, when anyone challenges me in public, I actually name the people and I name the links. So they don't ask me this ever again, because it happened to me in the 1990s. And in a television interview, I actually mentioned the names of all the people who were being controlled by foreign governments in Sri Lanka. And of course, they tried to get me arrested and do all sorts of crazy things. But anyway, we know this happens. But that's where I would say to you, please read this famous politician called Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. Lee Kuan Yew is a very right-wing politician, I'm afraid to say. But one of the things he was obsessed with is he didn't want foreigners controlling their bureaucrats and their politicians. Because if you allow that to happen, then you cannot have a national development strategy. So I think that's my last message to everyone, is be very careful about that. But I'm very pleased to know that you have an industrialization strategy, at least in name, you know, whether that's really going to be aggressively implemented, I don't know. But now I'm going to be following Indonesia a bit more carefully. I didn't know that you had this strategy. I now need to look at the numbers and see what's happening there. Because you're such a potentially powerful country. I mean, potentially Indonesia should be one of the leaders in East Asia. Yes, Ahmed, I'm happy to continue. That's up to you. You can ask me whatever questions.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Professor. I'm so sorry to say that because we seen in the chat box there are so many questions from the participants. Maybe some of the participants want to raise hand and deliver the question live for the professor. Please
Sure.
feel free. Will enjoy.
Somebody has just asked a question. I think, Reza, you're maybe echoing a question from someone else. Industrialization with so many loans from abroad. Well, what I argue always is you should, so in this modern world, one way to industrialize is joint ventures. Don't borrow. Do joint ventures, because you see, the thing is, you also need the technology from the foreign companies and you need their market access. So when you sign FDI agreements, foreign direct investment agreements, what you should do is make sure there is a technology transfer element. There is a human development element, so education. And what is very, very important is they should help you access foreign markets, well, the joint venture. And let me just give you an example of what happened with Vietnam. So I mentioned Vietnam because now here's what happens with me, okay? So when I started seeing China doing something in 1995, that's when I first noticed China, I immediately asked my old students, can I teach there? So it took a long time, but eventually in 2000, I was able to teach in China, and I taught 3 classes a year at the beginning, which was wonderful, but it helped me learn what was going on. And what I learned from the Chinese already is they really wanted joint ventures with technology transfer and market access. This is what I learned from many, many of the very senior business people who came to my classes. In 2012, when I started to hear about Vietnam shifting to this aggressive industrialization strategy, I did the same thing. I asked my old students, can you get me teaching in Vietnam? And this helps me learn what's going on, also helps me learn what investments possibilities there are. So I will not tell you a lie. I'm also always interested in the investments. And what I saw in Vietnam is they were copying China. They were doing the same thing. Now, there's a good case study. Let me tell you the case study. It's a very interesting one. is the Vietnamese targeted Samsung from Korea, because what the Vietnamese said to the Western countries, also to the Koreans, we hate China like you hate China. Okay, so please bring your investments to our country. Disinvest from China, come to Vietnam. Okay, so it's a very simple thing that they did, was they played the anti-China card. And then Korea actually said, okay, we'll think about it. And then what happened is they had a negotiation round with Samsung. And Samsung asked for this concession, that concession, that concession. And the Vietnamese kept saying yes to everything. And then the Vietnamese even said, well, we can also do something extra for you. We can even give you your own immigration line in the airport, so you don't have to queue up ever and so on. You see, what was very important to the Vietnamese was Samsung invested and transferred a lot of its smartphone and semiconductor production to Vietnam, because that was the game changer. You see, Samsung has worldwide access to all markets. Vietnam didn't. Vietnam didn't have the technology, but after 3 or 4 years, Vietnam produced its first smartphone, its own first smartphone. Now they produce actually not bad smartphones at all, but they've just gone into the production of electric vehicles. Joint ventures, always joint ventures, where the guarantee is markets from the foreign companies. Okay, so here it's not borrowing money, because they don't want to have to repay. What they do is they have joint ventures which are export oriented, so they don't run out of foreign exchange. See, so you are never dependent in the final instance when you do joint ventures. Actually, it's the foreign companies that become dependent on you, not the other way around. Because they're making so much profits in your country that no matter what happens, they won't leave. Like Apple. When Donald Trump told Apple to disinvest from China, they didn't do it. They can't do it, because China not only is a cheap production base for them, but most of their sales worldwide is China. So the same thing today. Even if Vietnam gets into disfavor with the Koreans, Samsung will not disinvest. They have too much riding in Vietnam now. It's just too difficult for them to disinvest. The most important thing is you have to have your own companies that are going to benefit from that, take over the technology, and start producing other products. Okay.
Okay, Professor, sorry. We have 15 minutes remain, and maybe
Right.
some of participants want to deliver question lively. Please raise hand and feel free to speak up and deliver a question for Professor. Okay, while we're waiting the question from our participant, Professor, maybe I want to ask about recent condition in Indonesia context. Maybe you can give some opinion. There are 2 points. The first is the government is currently raising the price of fuel oil at a time when people are trying to recover from the impact of pandemic. How does the Marxist perspective see this? Is the first question. And second question, the gig economy is now a trend in countries around the world. In Indonesia, the emergence of this trend provides great job opportunities, such
Right.
as Grab car, and online shop. But
Right.
recently, the system implemented burden workers such as reduced bonus and high work standards. What do you think about this? Thank you, Professor.
The first question was about rising oil prices in Indonesia and the impact it's going to have on, let's say, the companies as well as ordinary people. Well, I think this is something that cannot be avoided. But what normally happens in situations like this is the more powerful the economy, the more you are resilient to those types of shocks to your system. You see, so let me just give you an example that in 2020, 21, I think Indonesia suffered badly, isn't it? Your trade balance collapsed, your current account balance collapsed, and you did badly. But Vietnam didn't. Vietnam did the opposite. Vietnam's reserves never grew as much as they did in 2020 and 21. That is because they were into manufacturing production. And don't forget, production in the West closed down. So Vietnam started supplying lots and lots of manufactured goods to the West, but most important, the government gave subsidies to the producer to produce home office equipment. Because in the West, everybody was being encouraged to go and work from home. So the Vietnamese started producing home office equipment. And this way, unlike Sri Lanka, we got into trouble. We lost all our reserves and we were destroyed. And that happened to all the African countries that I've come across, all the Latin American countries. But these diversified, export-oriented East Asian countries survived and did very well. You know, so they did well, China did well, Taiwan did well, etc. Okay. So this is one very important point, and that is also now coming to oil. They will raise the price of goods in their countries. They will have to absorb the oil increase. But in my view, you have to think smart. Now, if I were you, I would do deals with Russia directly. So you can get a barrel of oil from Russia now at between $45 and $50 a barrel. You know, if you do a direct deal with them. And there the problem is your government would not want to upset the West. But there are many ways. So I know for a fact that the Vietnamese are buying Russian oil in all manner of different ways. I know that many countries now are starting to do the same thing. Okay, so I think your government has to be smart and use whatever opportunities they have to keep your, let's say, your manufacturing agenda going, because part of what is happening is a deliberate attempt by the West to destroy any type of industrialization efforts of developing countries. So we are now signing a structural adjustment agreement with the IMF. Part of that agreement, I know, not formally, but informally, is we do not support export-oriented manufacturing. That is what I know. I knew this anyway. I mean, I could have predicted it without even having access to the confidential documents. I knew this is what the game was. So I think you have to be very, you have to concentrate a lot on the most important thing. And there, if you have to pay higher prices for oil, in my view, I think that you have to protect the vulnerable people in your society. And I mean that not because I care for the poor. I think this is a smart economic thing to do. Because when people are angry and they don't have the basics that they enjoyed before, then they don't work so well and you don't get the same cooperative system. So I think that there needs to be, let's say, cooking fuel subsidies for certain income levels and things like that. You can be very imaginative because it's not only fuel, it's also food prices, which are rising terribly. And I think those things also need to be subsidized for the poor. There should be a proper welfare net. And now here, I use the IMF and the World Bank to support me because they've also said, you must have a welfare net. So I tell the government, oh, look, see, they also said welfare net, because I think it's also positive for us, Your second question was, sorry, I forget. Oh yeah, the gig economy. Yeah. So I think, yes, I can understand that there's going to be a displacement of a lot of people and their jobs and so on and so forth. But that always happens with major technological changes. If you don't go with it, you become less competitive. And I think that's not wise. What you have to do is to make it work for you. So, for example, you have a whole new blockchain technology, which can be used to help small producers, say small rice farmers, small vegetable farmers, etc., bypass middle people who usually take quite a large percentage of the money that these farmers make, and that can be used to bypass them. You can also try and find avenues for bypassing the main international retailers as well. Okay, so there are structures that are now today being created to do all those things. I think that's where blockchain is really, really important to help in those processes. I think e-commerce can be very beneficial because one of our biggest problems in the past has been the stranglehold of all these Western retailers and even the retailers in our own countries. For example, I can just give you that the vegetable wholesalers in Sri Lanka, they take at least 50 to 60% of the profits of the farmers, at least 50 to 60%. And I think using this new technology to bypass a lot of the retailers is not a bad thing, because when the farmers have more profits to reinvest, they're less vulnerable, and the food can be also much cheaper going into the marketplace. Yes, Bank of China selling their dollars to save yen. Well, actually, that's a very interesting thing that is happening there. The first thing to say is the fall of the yen and the euro is justified by two economic forces. The first economic force that is very important to note is that historically, both Japan and Europe have had balance of payments surpluses, current account surpluses, because they're very productive in terms of manufacturing goods. And the US has historically had deficits. And that's why they've always had to have higher interest rates in the US to keep the balance. Now you have two forces operating at the same time. One is that Europe and Japan have gone into negative balances, current account and trade balances. And the US is raising its interest rates faster than both Japan and Europe because Japan and Europe are much weaker at the moment. So these two forces are operating to push the yen down and the euro down. Now, at a certain point, the Japanese central bank was told by the Americans, not that they wanted to do this, that they would not tolerate much more depreciation of the yen against the dollar because it's destroying any last manufacturing that the Americans have. You see, so, and also the thing is China understood what was going on, and then the Chinese decided to depreciate the RMB as well. So then you have Japan, Europe, and China all depreciating against the dollar, which is really, really bad for American industry. And the Americans suddenly said, wait a minute, you stop this. We are not going to allow this to continue. Okay, so that is basically what happened, in my view, on the yen.
Okay, sir. We have 2 minutes left. Are you still open for the further question?
Yes, somebody has just asked one. Do you want me to answer that one about Iran and the nuclear problem and the embargo and all the rest of it? I think whoever has asked this question and is studying there is probably doing a good thing studying in Iran at the moment. Yes, in fact, oil and gas and food is actually very cheap in Iran. And you're right, they haven't gone down the industrialization path, but they've done something that seems to be very, very important for the future, is they've signed this monster deal with China for infrastructure. So what I have read is that China is going to build 2 really long railway lines that'll hugely reduce costs of production in Iran. And they've agreed to build road systems and bridges, quite extensively as all part of the Road and Belt Initiative. Now, I think the problem there is that the Iranians should use this as a springboard for manufacturing-based industrialization if they don't want to get into the trouble that Sri Lanka has gotten in. So we got all these bridges and railways and roads from China, but we didn't do any manufacturing activity. And this meant that when the construction ended, all the economic activity ended. And we were left with nice infrastructure, but actually doing nothing. I mean, not productively. So I think your point is very good. And it also applies to Indonesia. Now, there you see the advanced countries are doing everything in their power to block that industrialization. The one country that now seems to be breaking out of it, and I've been having a discussion recently in that context, is India. So India seems to now be attracting a lot of Chinese and Western manufacturers who want to relocate out of the West. Now, my advice to Indonesia is this. There are lots of German companies that are determined to leave Germany. You should open yourself to those German companies, because usually German companies do not come for 5 and 10 years. They come for very long periods, and they go in groups. And if possible, attract engineering companies. I shouldn't be telling you this because you are my competitor. You are a competitor to Sri Lanka. But I would love to see Indonesia do well. I would love to see Indonesia actually get on this, because I think you can be a real strong powerhouse, another powerhouse for Asia. And that's important for the developing world generally. And this is a good opportunity. Don't miss this opportunity. You will not get this again, because the German companies and the French companies and so on, they're all looking to leave, because this energy problem of the West is a disaster. I don't know what they have done. I don't know why they have done what they have done, but it's a disaster. And this is a great opportunity for all of us. I keep telling this to the Sri Lankans and hoping that somebody listens to me at some point.
Oh yeah,
I think we're
Professor,
done.
actually the time is up, but if you don't bother, there is participant, Mr. Sultan Fatoni, now study in Iran right now. He want to share with us about the condition in Iran, if you don't bother.
Hello, Sultan.
Mr. Sultan Fatoni, yeah, Mr. Sultan Fatoni.
I see
How are
you,
you?
but I don't hear you. Hello.
Yeah. Thanks for
Okay.
the invitation. Actually, I'm not a student of economic or politics. I'm studying religion here, but I'm interested in Marx and his idea, but it is not what I expected about Marx ideas, as you said, that about capitalism and other. But what is interesting here in Iran is they have a good engineering and doctor here, but I don't know why there is no good industrialization here. And actually I see the raw materials like oil and gas are good here, but other things like engineers, I saw good engineers here, but I don't see industrialization here, or I don't know. Maybe
Right.
like you say that the Western bloc them, but I don't know what is the real problem here. Thanks for the lectures anyway. It's good.
Pleasure.
To
Pleasure was
listen to the
mine.
lecture. Yeah,
Good
thanks.
luck there.
Yeah.
Good luck there, Sultan.
Thanks.
Pleasure. I have nothing really to add to that. It's just I have not studied Iran in great detail, because only when I see countries coming on my radar, when I see manufacturing starting to rise, then I start studying them in greater detail. But I can say this, that in the 40 years I have known a lot of Iranian students and also teachers. And it's a culture and a people with incredible ability. They have such a long and deep culture that once they get that process underway, they will be a powerhouse in the Middle East. I have no doubt about it. I mean, as soon as I see that process starting in Iran, I will be visiting Iran immediately to look at the companies there. Because they have this very strong historic culture. The Persian culture has been one of the great cultures on the planet. And the ability of the people, I'm always staggered every time I meet an Iranian to see, their vast knowledge and, their cultural sophistication and all the rest of it, that you get a lot of hope for the country, from the people that you meet. But indeed, you know, when nothing is happening like this, and I say the same in Sri Lanka, because, you know, I can throw a stone and hit a very able young Sri Lankan person who could, you know, work for 1/4 of the wages that are paid in Europe and do a better job. And yet we can't get this process going, you know. And it's that. But I must tell you this, you know, this is my parting thing, is when I told you I was invited to this conference in Cairo because so many sub-Saharan African people listen to the lectures that I give, and they know exactly what the problem is, this blocking of industrialization. And delegate after delegate who I met told me they 100% agree with me, and they will not continue to allow this to happen. You know, there's a determination from a younger generation that this is not going to continue. You know, and I believe that. I really believe that. I think the West does not understand the anger and frustration building up all over the world. So they got a shock when so many countries in the world started to support Russia in this conflict. You know, the West got a real shock. And in my view, it's not that they love Russia. Actually, it's their anger and frustration towards the West blocking them. And they know it, you know, they know it. I don't even need to tell them. It's just that they saw me articulating this and they said, oh, it's the first person that they've seen in the West actually understand their problems. So what I can say is we're about to see a cascade effect. And I think it's over now. You know, I've also read many scholars who are saying the same thing I'm saying, that it's over. The West's ability to manipulate and dominate developing countries is now over, and it's not going to be tolerated. And it doesn't matter which perspective you have, you know, it's not going to be tolerated. And for me, when I see what is happening with Saudis and a lot of these countries like the Emirates and the Saudis and so on, doing business with both Russia and China, and even pledging to trade in rubles and yuan, I think it's over. The game is over now for the West. And that is why I encourage my children, my own children. So I have one who is teaching in Vietnam. The other is finishing a PhD in Sri Lanka. And my third one is now also thinking about doing consultancy work somewhere in Asia, because I don't see much of a hope for the West in the future. I think it's disintegrating, it will disintegrate faster. But the most important thing is I see, you know, countries like Indonesia, I think the pressure soon is going to be unbearable for the government if they don't do something. You know, if they don't go down this path. And the same for other countries. You know, I think it's, if I'm right, you will see the explosion by 2025, if I'm right.
Okay, good answer, Professor. I offer for all the participants, if you have a further question, you can write in the chat box or directly.
Ahmad, I'll tell you what, because I have to now finish. Sorry, Ahmad. Can you do me this favor? Why don't you write to me the questions, some of the outstanding questions, and I will write back to you.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, just write to me the questions and I will write back. And if you can please just send it to everyone who has registered.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Okay, my apologies. I only left 2 hours for this.
Yes, it is our planning. Okay, maybe there are still questions from the participant. You can write the question in the chat box and we will send to Professor Howard,
Yeah.
and we share back the answer for you all.
Yeah.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, it's over the time. And for Professor Howard, it's very interesting discussion. Thank you
Yeah.
for the excellent presentation. There are so many discussions from the audience to follow up in productive discussion. But the time is limited. Maybe we have other time to running this excellent session. Okay, I
Sure.
note and underline
Sure.
what you said. You said that you can damage the grave and the stones, but cannot damage the marked ideas. It's
Yeah.
very interesting for me, because in Indonesia context, marked ideas perceive like a nightmare for some people because of distortion of history and the new order propaganda. Thank you, Professor, for the insightful
Pleasure, Aman.
presentation.
And
Ya, terima kasih semuanya.
see you all.
Terima kasih
Wish
semuanya.
you
See you.
all a lot.
See you.
And please, let's get together again, and I will give you a full presentation on the global economy, because I think it's very, very important. It's now I'm being asked all over the place to make this presentation, and my son prepares all of these presentations with lots of information. So we will get together again. Okay.
Okay. We are waiting. Maybe there are some reading or articles we have need to read.
Yeah, I will give you as much as I could.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you,
Pleasure.
Professor. I'm so sorry.
See you.
For your
No,
time.
no, bye-bye.
Ya, see you. Ya. Oke.
I'll catch
Terima
up
kasih
with
juga
you.
untuk ya. Terima kasih juga untuk semuanya partisipan. Semoga nanti kita bisa bertemu kembali di session berikutnya, diskusi acara yang sangat menarik ini. Saya Ahmad Arif Widianto mohon diri, mohon maaf jika ada salah. Sampai jumpa di sesi berikutnya. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mohon izin live.